Hello everyone, this is Daniel Tekanoff. This lesson is Patrick Henry versus the Preamble. So let's set the scene up here a little bit. The Constitutional Convention of 1787 has completed. They've sent the Constitution to Congress. Congress has sent it out to the state legislatures. Some of the state legislators have set up the state ratification conventions to ratify the new Constitution. Virginia, which is one of the most important and largest states at the time, start their ratification convention on June 2, 1788. So they go through the rules process and then they begin. And early on, Patrick Henry, one of the main speakers against the new Constitution and speaking for more amendments, stands up and says, "What right had they to say, 'we the people'? My political curiosity, exclusive of my anxious solicitude for the public welfare, leads me to ask, who authorized them to speak the language of 'we the people' instead of 'we the states'?" So Patrick Henry is basically challenging the preamble, and he continues on here stating that the states are the characteristic and the soul of a confederation. If the states are not the agents of this compact, then it must be one great consolidated national government of the people of all the states. Then Edmund Randolph, who had attended the Constitutional Convention as part of the Virginia delegation, stands up and answers. And he's referring to Patrick Henry. The gentleman then proceeds and inquires why we assume the language of "we the people." I ask, why not? The government is for the people, and the misfortune was that the people had no agency in the government before. What harm is there in consulting the people on the construction of a government by which they are to be bound? Is it unfair? Is it unjust? If the government is to be binding on the people, are not the people the proper persons to examine its merits or defects? I take this to be one of the least and most trivial objections that will be made to the Constitution. Now, there's a point here to think about as well. When we go back into it, another Constitutional Convention per Article 5, the people should be the agents. In other words, the people should be electing their own representatives to that convention. Then the next day, on June 5, one of the main speakers at the Virginia Ratification Convention, Mr. Pendleton, stands up and also responds. But an objection is made to the form. The expression, "we the people," is thought improper. Permit me to ask the gentleman who made this objection, who but the people can delegate powers? Who but the people have a right to form government? The expression is a common one and a favorite one with me. Mr. Pendleton goes on. If the objection be that the Union ought to be not of the people, but of the state governments, then I think the choice of the former very happy and proper. What have the state governments to do with it? Were they to determine, the people would not in that case be the judges upon what terms it was adopted. But the power of the convention is doubted. What is the power? To propose, not to determine. This power of proposing was very broad. It extended to remove all defects in government. The members of that convention who were to consider all the defects in our general government were not confined to any particular plan. This is a very important point also for the future Article 5 convention. They will be able to look at every clause and take into account every part of the Constitution. Because if you make a change to one part, it might affect another, and so you have to be open to considering the whole thing. Then another speaker stands up on June 5, Mr. Lee, and also responds to Patrick Henry's challenge. And he states, he then adverted to the style of the government and asked what authority they had to use the expression "we the people" and not "we the states." This expression was introduced into that paper with great propriety. This system is submitted to the people for their consideration, because on them it is to operate, if adopted. It is not binding on the people until it becomes their act. Ought we not to make use of the name of the people? No other style would be proper. Then Patrick Henry stands up again on June 5, and he goes right back at it. I rose yesterday to ask a question which arose in my own mind. When I asked that question, I thought the meaning of my interrogation was obvious. The fate of this question and of America may depend on this. Have they said, "we the states"? Have they made a proposal of a compact between states? If they had, this would be a confederation. It is otherwise most clearly a consolidated government. The question turns, sir, on that poor little thing, the expression, we the people, instead of the states of America. Then Patrick Henry goes on and says, it is radical in this transition. Our rights and privileges are endangered, and the sovereignty of the states will be relinquished. And cannot we plainly see that this is actually the case? Then the next day, on June 6, James Madison gets up, and he does not mince words. He says that should all the states adopt it, it will then be a government established by the 13 states of America, not through the intervention of the legislatures, but by the people at large. In this particular respect, the distinction between the existing and proposed governments is very material. Then Madison goes on and makes clear that the existing system has been derived from the dependent, derivative authority of the legislatures of the states, whereas this is derived from the superior power of the people, meaning that the state ratification conventions, which actually approved the new text of the Constitution, those delegates were elected directly by the people, not by the state legislatures. Then another delegate on June 6, Mr. Nicholas, responds to Patrick Henry's challenge to the Preamble. And he states here, referring to Patrick Henry, did not he, Henry, prove that every people had a right to change their government when it should be deemed inadequate to their happiness? The Confederation being found utterly defective, will he deny our right to alter or abolish it? But he objects to the expression, we the people, and demands the reason why they had not said, we the United States of America? Mr. Nicholas goes on, in my opinion, the expression is highly proper. It is submitted to the people because on them it is to operate. Till adopted, it is but a dead letter and not binding on anyone. When adopted, it becomes binding on the people who adopt it. It is proper on another account. We are under great obligations to the Federal Convention for recurring to the people, the source of all power. Here, Nicholas is referring to the theory of free government. That is, it is the people who should elect their own representatives, and hopefully there is a connection to the people and the government. Mr. Nicholas continues, referring to Patrick Henry's argument, the gentleman's argument militates against himself. He says that persons in power never relinquish their powers willingly. If then the state legislatures would not relinquish part of the powers they now possess to enable a general government to support the Union, reference to the people is necessary. This is a very interesting idea because it reflects actually a defect in our current Article 5 Convention Clause, because we've given power to the state legislatures to begin that convention, but that convention could potentially take away powers not only from the federal government but from the state legislatures as well, and that is a reason why they might hesitate to call, because they don't want to lose their own powers, not realizing that by taking that short-sighted viewpoint, they're leaving the long-term view of the common good at risk. Then on June 7, another speaker, Mr. Corbin, stands up and responds to Patrick Henry's challenge to the Preamble and states, the introductory expression of we the people has been thought improper by the honorable gentleman. I expected no such objection as this. Ought not the people, sir, to judge of that government whereby they are to be ruled? Now we're going to look at just a few more comments before the end of that convention. James Madison, a few days later on June 11, makes clear the people at large are the common superior of the state governments and the general government. Then on June 12, Madison again emphasizes that the general government and state governments all radiate from the people at large. The people is their common superior. Then to close this out, John Marshall, the future Chief Justice, on June 16 states that the state governments did not derive their powers from the general government, but each government derived its powers from the people. This is a point that John Marshall then states in his Supreme Court opinions over the years, and in particular the McCulloch versus Maryland case, where he came out under a pen name to defend the theory of free government. So, what happens with respect to Patrick Henry versus the Preamble? The Preamble wins. The Constitution is ratified by enough states where the government starts, but the efforts of Henry and George Mason and others causes James Madison and others to promise to get a Bill of Rights at the first Congress, which they do. They also make sort of a future promise to go back into convention when structural defects are discovered through time and experience. But those promises are expected to be kept by future generations. For further study, I invite you to take a look at my book, Guide to the First Article 5 Convention of the People.